right picture for your audience when you are trying to invoke a positive outcome is worth 1,000 words. It's about how you tell the story, and the story can be a lot of fun. I could have bought a refrigerator where I could look in the refrigerator and see what's inside of it from my phone while I was at the store to see if I needed to pick up milk. That exists. Samsung has it. Hopefully it won't explode in your pocket and set your leg on fire. But so how many of you tried to use the internet on Friday or had your people try to use it and it became a problem? Well, that's what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the why, talk about the how, talk about how to prevent it. Even if we want to be obscure, we have robots out on the internet scanning every single address, looking for vulnerabilities, looking for things out there that they can hack. And proving it just became a whole lot easier because last Friday, we had millions of them go in a very orchestrated, well-architected denial of service attack. And the way they found them? By having the robots just sniff. That's all. They just looked for IP addresses, they got on the right port on the internet, and they tried default usernames and passwords that these manufacturers put into their systems. We can't hide any longer. Security through obscurity isn't going to work. How many of you have taken a USB stick and plugged it in a computer, and 30 seconds later you use it? That's the universal plug-and-play protocol. It's a way for two machines to talk to each other, to mate up. Well, it turns out that functionality was not explicitly limited to USB ports inside computers. If you knew how to get over that functionality over the internet, you could tell a computer that it just had a new networking card. So start sending all the traffic through you. They took USB drives and left them in the parking lot, and they just waited for someone to hook them up. And it worked. Eventually someone did. They wanted to see what was on it. And they released Stuxnet, and it blew up the centrifuges. Really pretty impressive. And the board was doing a on-site survey, an on-site visit of one of the stores. And they were going to be there at 11 a.m. And the CIO was going to be there, and the COO was going to be there. And at about 11:05, something happened. Something went wrong to where they lost their internet connectivity. And all the cash registers had to go back to manual processing, which means they had to pick up the phone and start calling the credit card companies to see whether or not the cards would go through. And the lines started getting longer. And the people started getting angrier. And the number of people that abandoned their carts and walked out the door started to take place. And the board was right there to see it. Now this is potentially a resume-generating event. This is not a method just of communication. This is a stunt. Sometimes stunts are effective. Sometimes stunts can work. Evel Knievel had a very successful career doing stunts. If you have the support of someone in a large position of power and authority on your executive board that wants to help you bring a dramatic message to the board, it is something to consider. That being said, at 11:25, when the situation somehow corrected itself, there were some explaining that had to be done as well. Now in the end, with this story, I'm going to say Circuit City got those backup lines. It worked. It did change the rate because the board felt what had happened. They didn't just hear about it. They were a part of it. And that was the difference. People will forget what you tell them. People will likely remember what you show them. People will always remember how you made them feel. And if I can try to tell a story that will get the feelings across as to why these things work and how we can implement them in your systems, I think I'm going to have a really good time. Breaches have become serious enough to where they're beginning to become a life safety issue. They went after the government. They were able to get into the HR department of the government. There is a fundamental problem with that. The existence of your information in the HR system of the U.S. government means you have had some sort of dealings with the U.S. government, by definition. So if you're living in one of the countries that we're not as friendly with, and they know that you're in there for some good reason, that's how people disappear. This isn't a game anymore. The bad guys got in through the HVAC company. They wormed the way around until they found the source code of the software that runs the cash registers. They got to the cash register system. It's called the POS, or the point of sale. And they were able to manipulate the code of the point of sale system to do something very interesting. So normally, you have your swipe card thingy. Now, of course, in retail, you have to have an acronym for it, right? So it's a GPD, a guest payment device. Yeah. So you take the GPD, and you swipe your card. and it moves that data, let's say it's in an encrypted format, over to the cash register, right, to complete the transaction. Well, the cash register will talk to the GPD in whatever format those two manufacturers likely came up with. Then, the cash register is going to talk to your other systems. I'm just going to call those the mothership. And it's going to do that in a format and with a method of encryption that typically the mothership systems have figured out, especially when you're running your own source code for the cash registers. So the cash register has to do a change from one set of encryption to another. And here's what the bad guys did. The steps used to be swipe card, encrypt data, move data to cash register, decrypt and recrypt the data in a new way, move data over to the mothership. They said, swipe the data, encrypt the data, unencrypt the data, grab a copy, re-encrypt the data, move it on to the mothership. It's called memory scraping. They added a very, very small number of lines of code. And like was mentioned in my intro, I am a weekend auto racer, and there's a joke that happens where when things go a little sideways with your race car and you slide off the track into the grass, some magical force begins accelerating your car through the grass towards that wall that you're about to run into. And I don't know how it works, and I don't know why, but I've been there. And somehow that stationary wall starts coming at you very, very fast. Well, that wall regrettably hit my career. And I made some important decisions shortly after that. One, I wanted to understand why. I wanted to understand why this had happened, and I wanted to understand real-world things that could be done to keep this from happening in the future. Where were these breakdowns? And how could they have been prevented? And what were the real-world scenarios with the communication between technical and non-technical people, between the setup of our systems, between the way that we make our companies go, that could have made this not take place? And now I have the wonderful opportunity to talk with all of you about the things that I've learned, about where my research has gone, and about the ability to tweak and change the way your companies work so that you don't end up the next target. There are companies that are going to a passwordless authentication scheme successfully. Now, I hate to use this example because Yahoo just had a little oopsie tittle in the news. But if you have a Yahoo account, they use your phone as something you have authentication. They use your fingerprint as something you are authentication, and you get in on your computer from a token that's sent from your smartphone. That's pretty cool. And it works well. Works well. Someone was pulled over, and their phone was interrogated against their will, and they claimed that that was a violation of their rights because they didn't have a warrant. And the Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, agreed. Why? Why? Because they all have one. The price of stolen credit cards was falling in the market. The bad guys were getting so good at stealing the stolen credit cards that the folks trying to monetize the cards couldn't keep up, and the law of supply and demand was kicking into effect, so that the price of those stolen cards was beginning to drop. I didn't know when I read this that around 8 hours later, what is now the third largest retail breach in history was about to begin, that the switch was about to be flipped, and 40 million credit cards are going to walk out the door. Well, 2 weeks later, when the Secret Service came knocking, then we knew, yeah. And a week after that, when the size and scope of the problem was beginning to be understood, 80% of all the work that my teams were doing just came to a halt. I was a senior group manager there. I was leading a team of program managers that were working on projects that touched the stores themselves. I'd started at Target around 7 months earlier, and they gave me this role to learn more about retail and learn more about Target, and we were having a ball. It was a lot of fun. It was a great place to work. But when 80% of everything your team works on comes to a screeching halt, because remediation as a result of the breach is going to take center stage, that changes things a little bit. And 6 weeks after I saw this slide, there were 600 of us in a room who were told that the direction of the company was going a different way, and that there were other problems that had to be solved, and that our services were no longer a fit with the company. Coming home that day was a little more challenging. I have at the time, a 2-year-old and a 7-month-old, and a wife that has a much more difficult job than me. Her job is to try to stay home and watch those 2 children. And I needed to let them know that the career had to take a new direction. Well, coming out of that, I had a pretty strong ringing in my ears, and it took a while to come out, but the ringing was very easy to try to describe. The ringing said, what in the world just happened? What was going on? We were doing good work, and that work was strong, and it was powerful, and things were going well, and all of a sudden, the freight train came, and we didn't see it coming. Now, the problem with a pacemaker is it doesn't just control people's heart. Almost all of them now have built-in defibrillators. And if you think about it like a bad guy, like a terrorist, what a defibrillator really is, it's a taser across your heart. Well, that's a bad thing. That's not something that you want someone who is not looking out for your best interest to have control of. And they found a way to actively control that pacemaker. Thankfully, it was in a theoretical environment. How many of you have ever seen, touched, used a Nest thermostat? They're actually, I'm surprised there aren't more. They're relatively popular, and they're neat. They do cool stuff. They know when you're home, they know when you're away. They will turn down your heat or AC when you're away. They will turn it back on in anticipation of you coming home. You can control them from your phone. So if I've got a bug up my rear end and I want to turn up the furnace in my house 5 degrees from here, I could do that. I'm not positive the advantage of doing it, but okay, it'll do it. And it does genuinely save money because it will work more efficiently in your home. All good things. So last January, this IoT device, it had an automatic update sent by Nest, and that automatic update had a problem. About one Nest thermostat in 500 stopped charging its little backup battery. Now, you don't even technically need batteries in a thermostat. The furnace can power a thermostat. That isn't that difficult to do. Okay? And the old style, for those of you who live in houses like pre-50s, if you take off the cover, you'll actually see a little mercury vessel in there on a spring. Okay, I better talk to this side of the room for that. It's all right, I'm with you. So furnaces work on 24 volts, so they will power the thermostat. Nest didn't build them that way. Nest built them so that that battery had to be active for the system to work. And if the batteries drained down to zero, it rolled over and played dead. Well, this happened in January. People lost the heat in their homes. Now, if you're a resourceful person, you can go down to Ace, you can buy a new thermostat, you can hook it up, you can try to get something up and going. But I'll be honest, that takes a fair amount of technical background, and most people can't just do that. So this was a real example of real issues with this new IoT whiz-bang stuff. How hard would it have been for Nest to say, how might this system fail? And because we cannot anticipate all the ways that it fails, just like the racetrack, what do we do to mitigate the risk? Well, I can tell you with today's technology, if I wanted to build a non-adjustable thermostat that just stuck on a wall and hooked up to a furnace and said, turn on the heat if it's less than 65 degrees and turn off the heat if it's 65 degrees or more, that would cost about 50 cents. It's a very, very easy thing to do nowadays. They didn't do that. They didn't give it a failure mode. What is it supposed to do when it fails? Well, you know what it does when it fails? It turns off and does nothing. Who knows you better as a person? Your spouse or your phone? The fact you even have to think about that for a second says a lot about the data in this device, doesn't it? It knows where you've been with GPS tracking. It likely knows where you're going because it has your schedule and it has Google Maps on there. It knows what you're into because you're searching on it. It knows what you're considering in the future because you may be taking notes.
It knows a lot about you. It's an extension of yourself. And now that we have that, I feel very strongly that we are in an era to where this embracing technology from the user standpoint is allowing us to do multi-factor authentication in ways that were unreasonable back in 2008.